Yo, what is up guys? It is Bumfries, back with episode 41 of our Reddit series. This one's going to be a bit more pro-revenge, and I know you're going to love this one. Just a quick thank you to everyone who subscribed recently. We've just hit 130,000 subscribers, and that is incredible. So thanks again, and if you're new around here and you like my stuff, don't forget to smash the subscribe button. Now sit back, relax, and laugh at some pro-revenge. I saw your crazy neighbor stories, and now I bring you my father's that stuck in my memory. English is not my first language, and I hope I didn't make any spelling mistakes. We live in a small private neighborhood. The neighbors are related to us more or less, like distant relatives, and everybody here is a complete nutjob. They were constantly arguing over decades before me or my brother were even born. Our property line is kind of like a square, and it's surrounded by road from two sides. Keep in mind that on one part of the road, we let our neighbors use 1 square meter of the land so they could use the road safer and not damage our property. This is crucial information. This road is made of gravel, and the neighbors want my parents and only my parents to pay for the entire cost to lay an asphalt road. My dad and mother are constantly fixing potholes for 90% of the road, so naturally, our neighbors thought that they'll pay for the asphalt road. Classic choosing beggars. Fast forward 20 years, the road remains gravel-ish. Nobody wanted to pay for the asphalt road. So one day, my neighbor orders a massive truck filled with tons of wood. This truck driver ran over our fence. Nobody wanted to pay for the damage, and our fence is made out of multiple bushes, trees, and a little bit of metal fence too. These plants were now completely destroyed, and a part of the metal fence completely bent. We had to replant these plants and place a new metal fence. My father told me this was not the first time this had happened, but actually the third. I couldn't believe it when I heard this. So this is where the revenge begins. My father is a police officer in the department where they mostly handle frauds, drug busts, etc. He knows the law very well. He dug up the property line marker and placed plastic barrels filled with rocks on our property. In the next 6 hours, 3 of our neighbors came knocking on the door because they'd hit our plastic barrels filled with rocks. They were angry and wanted to call the cops, but they never did, because everybody knew that that little part of land was still our property. One neighbor in particular threatened my dad that he will throw a pickaxe at my father's back. Over the period of 1 year, these neighbors hit the barrels so much with their cars that the barrels are now worthless. My father was furious, and he changed his petty revenge into a pro-revenge. He cut some wood up to use it as a mold. He brought cement, sand, and metal poles. One peaceful afternoon, my father and I cemented the whole part of the land and placed some lovely flowers on top. So when they hit the concrete, they can smell our flowers of victory/defeat. As we expected, 5 neighbors in total wrecked their cars on the new fence, and nobody came knocking on the door. So unlike most stories we see on pro-revenge and entitled parents, this dude actually has some pretty good pictures to back it up. I'll put a link in the description to this particular post so you guys can check them out. It's pictures of like the wall and the house plan and those types of things. But that aside, this dude really got away with destroying 5 people's cars and not one of them said a word. I guess this can serve as a lesson. If you can't beat someone with petty revenge, turn into pro-revenge and you just can't lose. This story happened when I was 6 years old, but my mum retells it so often that the details are ingrained. I went to daycare while my mum worked. The daycare had a large playground with a jungle gym, plastic lawn chairs for sitting, a slide, swings, sandbox, and a playhouse. One day, a boy kept going down the slide without giving anyone else turns. I decided to take a turn as he reached the bottom. When I reached the bottom of the slide, the boy hit me in the right side of my face with a blue plastic lawn chair. I started crying and ran towards a teacher. The boy kept trying to make me be quiet and pushed me. Now, the playground was covered with pebbles and sand, and I was wearing shorts, so I hurt my knees and hands. I already could barely see, and this made me cry louder. A daycare worker came over to me, admonished the boy, and cleaned up my hands and knees. I actually had bloody scrapes on my knees that needed bandages, my cut and bruise on my right cheek, and my right eye wouldn't open properly. All of this is important for what happens next. My mum picked me up at the same time as most parents. When she saw my bandages and my injured eye, she got out of the car, stormed into the daycare, and demanded to speak to the staff. She was yelling at the top of her lungs to find out who was responsible, what happened, and why she wasn't called about my injuries. The boy, let's call him Kyle, and his mum were still at the daycare. I told my mum that Kyle was the one that hit me with the chair. And my mum screams, "Who is Kyle?" So I pointed at Kyle and his mum who were getting ready to leave. My mum stormed over there, and although I don't remember the exchange between her, the staff, and Kyle's mum, my mum made it clear that she would make them pay. My mum took me to the hospital, got photos taken, and called the police at the hospital to take a report and press charges against the daycare. My mum was serving in the US Navy at the time, and she had a lawyer the next morning. My mum then called the local news and did an interview with me at her side. Parents started pulling their children from the daycare soon after. The director of the daycare asked to sit down with my mum a few days later. My mum, her lawyer and I sat in the office and she made her terms clear. The daycare would pay for my injuries out of court, or the local news would cover the trial as they went to court. They settled for an amount that my mum refused to disclose. My optometrist says to this day that my right eye is still smaller than the left eye and my right eye has worse vision. But the daycare closed the year after I got injured. So this lady just about run a daycare out of business just to get some revenge. If this isn't pro-revenge, I don't know what is. This is some of the most cold-hearted revenge I've ever heard of. Still though, good on her. Her son deserved to be compensated for the way that he was treated by both that child and the daycare, and at least she got that. But for real, I just cannot get over this one. So I was in primary school and I had my older brother, who was a legend by the way, in the year above. There was another kid in my brother's year who thought he was above everyone else because his mother ran a huge business and my mum worked in one of her highest roles. Therefore, he felt like I was the crap on the bottom of his shoes. And guess what? We were effing next door neighbors. At first, he bullied me verbally, but one day we went to a party and it got physical. I was roaming around with my friends and my legendary bro in tow. Then out of nowhere, the abuse started. I ignored him, but then he began climbing a climbing frame. All was good until he found a cricket bat and some hard cricket balls, not the soft ones. He then began hitting them at me, and he was a county cricketer, so each one of them connected and it hurt like hell. He ran out of balls and did the next rational thing. He threw the effing bat at me. Even writing this years on, I'm still pissed. I ran off crying and got a slap for my troubles. I began breaking down in front of my mum, yelling about how my life was hell with him around and how I didn't like life. This harassment lasted throughout the rest of school, and sometimes he would even come around to my house to bully me. When he left primary, it stopped. He was very busy with rugby, football, and cricket, so he had no spare time to bully me. Fast forward 3 years and I'm in year 8, which for anyone who isn't British is roughly 12 to 13 years old. And I have a tennis match at the school that he goes to. I play my match, but I hear a scuffle in the background. Turns out he saw me and decided to try and bully me while I was playing. His coach saw this and he was restraining him because he was making very violent threats. I then realized that it was revenge time. The school he went to was a private school, meaning his parents had to pay a huge yearly sum to go there. He had only gone there because he'd got a scholarship because of his sporting ability. I win the match, then go over to his sports coach. I asked to see the headmaster of the school, and I then tell the headmaster everything that he'd done to me in the years of my life. His face just kept dropping even more. He believed me about the bullying because he had been seen verbally abusing me and making threats, which was not really helping his case. His sports coach decides enough is enough, and he decides to kick him off every sports team he was in for violent behavior and threat making. This then meant that the scholarship he'd been entitled to has disappeared, as it is stated that he has to be competing for the scholarship to be valid. His parents get called and they were pissed. I had single-handedly lost their family thousands of pounds a year. Damn, did it feel good. Man, I swear we have some of the most savage people ever in this episode. This is the type of thing I would picture in my head to do in order to get someone like this back, but I would never actually follow through with it. At least at the end of the day, the bully got what he deserved, the kid got his revenge, and the bully probably learnt that it doesn't pay to be a bully. I saw a post on here from about a year ago about how a guy reinforced his mailbox to stop his neighbour from running it over, and it reminded me of something my dad did to our a-hole neighbour years ago. When I was little, our next door neighbours were the biggest a-holes. They constantly messed with us, insulted us, threw garbage on our house, etc. One thing they used to do was knock over these wooden poles that we had in our grass, the part that separates our houses, with the bumper of their SUV and drive through our grass to get to their driveway. And when my dad would confront them, they would always tell us off and say, "Sue me." This happened a lot, so my dad waited until they were gone on vacation and dug all the poles out. Then he made the holes really big and proceeded to fill them all with big bags of concrete. Then he put in new longer poles and then put the grass back in and waited. Well, when they got back, it wasn't but a few days later that we heard a big bang and go outside to see the back of their SUV all jacked up. Our neighbor proceeds to lose his crap, saying that my dad had to pay for the damages, and my dad just smiled and said, "Sue me," and walked back inside. They were still a-holes after that, but damn, that was still pretty funny. I know a couple more stories about them, but I don't know if anyone would be interested. You know, this one's pretty similar to the one that we read before, but at least in this case, the dude was a right a-hole and he absolutely deserved to have this happen to him. I just wonder who this person is and where they're from to think that they're so entitled that they can literally destroy someone else's property and get away with it. But the funniest thing about it is that for so long he destroyed this person's property, his property gets wrecked by his own accord and then he loses it with the other guy. That's what makes this some real pro-revenge. Alright everyone, that is that for today's episode of Pro Revenge. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. You guys definitely seem to love the first episode of Pro Revenge, so I really hope you guys enjoyed this one as well. If you haven't noticed, while trying to build things around entitled parents, I'm mixing things up as much as I can. So another episode of Pro Revenge will probably be sometime next week. However, I would really love some input as to what you guys want to see in those other days. Feel free to either leave some suggestions down in the comments below, otherwise you can join my Discord server, there is a link to that in the description and I have a video suggestion section on there. But otherwise, just a quick thank you for the love. We're rocketing towards 150,000 subscribers and I really cannot thank all of you enough. You're all absolutely amazing and I appreciate every single one of you. But that is going to wrap things up for us today. Don't forget about the live stream. I hope to see as many of you there as possible. I'll be pinning a comment with the details, so hopefully that answers your questions. I hope you're all having a fantastic day and I'll see you all tomorrow for some more Entitled Parents. Bye.